before the House, the Electoral Finance Reform and Advance Voting Amendment Bill, will amend the Electoral Act 1993 to provide a package of reforms to ensure greater certainty and transparency in the conduct of elections, according to the explanatory note of the bill. And I can see that my tie is causing great amusement on the other side of the House. What I'd like to advise the members opposite, because it's a good time to give this advice to them, is that 350 is the group of young people who mobilised around the climate change issue last year. And it's a bit of a shame that there isn't instant familiarity over there as there is here with the issue, because 350 parts per million is the level at which the carbon levels in the atmosphere have to be stabilised at in order to prevent global temperatures keeping below 2 degrees Celsius, which the IPCC says is the key goal for us. And these young people, I know it's a slight digression, Mr Speaker, but I hope you'll indulge me. They came in to see our caucus this morning and to talk to us about where our policies were at in this area, and they were incredibly engaging young people, and it was great to see them, and I've worn this tie in their honour. So it's good to be able to explain that to members opposite. Hopefully that'll end the levity over that serious issue. Sir, I can assure Mr Tremaine I never make things up. That's a monopoly that's enjoyed on the other side of the House. Sir, Labour will support, as other speakers on this side have said, the new electoral legislation to Select Committee, but there are some real concerns about this bill, and the concerns that I want to speak to, sir, are those that are very similar to those that I mentioned in respect of the legislation that parallels this bill that was dealt with in the House a week or two ago. Sir, one major problem is the lack of any spending limit on parallel campaigners, and this was something that was highlighted in speeches on the companion legislation quite recently. No one in New Zealand in their right mind would want to see any election conducted at a local or a national level overrun by cash, sir. We don't want that on this side of the House. We don't want to allow parallel campaigners to have their ability to campaign on the two issues before voters without any financial limits overwhelming other voices in the election campaign. Now, sir, it's clear from the debate around the Electoral Finance Act that there was widespread concern around limiting parallel campaigners' spending to $120,000. Obviously, if there is to be a cap, and Labour says there should be in this area of parallel campaigning, we would obviously consider a higher spending cap, but not an unlimited third-party spending limit, sir. And this is something that the Select Committee, under the chairpersonship of Amy Adams, will hopefully hear a lot of evidence on and will have to, in our view, address. Because no one wants to see, as I said in my speech on the earlier companion legislation, a rerun of the mistakes that were made in the 2005 election. Sir, the government has also not properly considered the prospect of a lack of proper limits allowing wealthy individual or groups overwhelming other voices in the election campaign. And if they have considered that and nonetheless produced a bill in the current shape, then shame on them, because they've actually allowed for it. And that cannot be allowed to stand after the Select Committee process if we are to try as a House to produce decent electoral law. Sir, it is a good thing in the bill that parallel campaigners will have to register with the Electoral Commission. Clearly that will increase the sort of transparency that anyone who thinks decently about this sort of law will want to see. And it is an improvement actually on the current law, which only requires them to state their name and address on an advertisement and get permission before advertising in support of a political party or candidate. So that's something that is to be supported. But clearly that greater transparency will only have a beneficial effect if forcing parallel campaigners to register actually does reveal the person or entity who is responsible for the advertising. And under this bill's regime, it would be possible to use a front organisation to register as a promoter, a lawyer or another professional person could simply be used as an agent, and this would prevent the public from knowing who really is behind the group's spending. There's no requirement to disclose where a promoter's money comes from, so that's not a satisfactory element of the bill. It's something that the Select Committee will have to address. Mr Speaker, the Royal Commission on Electoral Reform, way back in 1986, concluded that limiting spending by political parties but not spending by parallel campaigners lacked any sort of logic, because political parties can simply give money to a lobbyist to run a negative campaign for them. So there's nothing in this legislation that will address that evil. In fact, it'll be exacerbated. And this is the very problem that is also faced in the US at the moment, sir. Supreme Court struck down the soft money prohibitions in the McCain-Feingold law, the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Act of, I think it was 2002. 80% of Americans think this is a bad thing. Notwithstanding that was a restriction on absolute freedom of speech, there was a widespread acceptance, even in that bastion of championing of freedom of expression, that in the area of electoral law you can't allow money to buy votes. And so now the US is in this vacuum as to what to do with soft money. Everybody knows that in the November midterm elections, if that striking down of the law isn't remedied, then there'll simply be a deluge of the soft money from corporates in favour of non-progressive candidates, and you'll have this phenomenon of the electorate being made awash with cash from a certain part of the political spectrum that is cashed up. If anybody supports democracy, they know that that is not a good thing. It is not a good thing to see us replicating the vacuum that exists through the accident of a court decision in the United States in our own legislation. Because political parties do face strict spending limits, and...
Point of order, John Hayes.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to draw your attention to Standing Orders, page 17. Speaker's Rulings, page 17, ruling number 1. And while the ruling says it refers to a hat, the second sentence of that ruling talks about wearing attire with advertising or a message written on it would not be acceptable. And I wonder if you'd like to rule on that in the case of...
Well, I will rule, and you're just interrupting, in my view, the Speaker. There is nothing untoward in what the member is wearing, and I'll ask the member to continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know that the 350 group will appreciate me wearing their tie, and they won't mind the fact that the member who's resumed his seat, notwithstanding his climate change denier credentials, is present in the chamber. Sir, the fact that political parties face strict spending limits, and as I said, both National and Labour spent close to their statutory limit in 2008, is important here. There will be an incentive in this bill if we don't address the parallel campaign issue and the campaign limits, spending limits issue, for parties to work with parallel campaigners who aren't subject to the limits in an attempt to get round the rules. And I hope that the chair of the Select Committee is paying close attention to these issues. She's nodding. That's good to see, because if a credible result from this process is to occur, which will be to the benefit of her career, then it would be really good to see these loopholes close. It's good that she says she appreciates the advice. Probably I'm not always the best person to give career-enhancing advice, but if we care about the quality of the outcome, it is something that ought to be addressed. Sir, as initially proposed, the new electoral finance provisions would have only required parallel campaigners to register when spending more than $20,000. But this bill contains a lower threshold of $12,000. Sir, it seems to us that it would be far better to go back to at least the original proposal. It is useful that the Minister has engaged in consultation prior to the introduction of the legislation, and I think it is appropriate to pay some tribute to him for that exercise, sir, because I think the experience of the House has to be that in producing sustainable and durable electoral law, it is appropriate to have widespread consultation on its provisions and, if possible, to achieve a consensus